Good day, it's Mike from FlexRadio, VA3MW. Today we are going to chat with Mr. Tim Ellison, Whiskey Tango, or Whiskey 4 Tango Mike Echo. And Tim has been with FlexRadio, what was it, 11, 10 years? That just came up?
11 years in July.
July. Tim is not even arguably probably the most knowledgeable in how the radio works, both not only under the covers and on top of the covers, being that Tim is also active on the air. And as we jokingly say, engineering sometimes just doesn't want to hear from us, but they do anyway. But and all kidding aside, we have the advantage of being able to provide some really good user feedback to our engineering teams, and they're actually welcome to hear us. So, Tim, how are you?
I'm doing great, Mike. How are you doing today?
Not too bad. Not too bad. We're going to talk about things all receiver today. We're going to talk about the S meter and why doesn't it read 0 when I hook up a dummy load and nothing's there? Why?
Okay.
How to use the AGCT?
Yep,
Most powerful control on the radio. We're going to talk about how not to use the AGCT because it's not an
appropriate
RF
too.
Yep. And we're going to talk about when not to use a preamp.
Yes.
And how, and maybe we could talk about, is it gain bound? I forgot the term. Anyway, there's some numbers you can watch, right? So
yeah. There's some numbers you can watch. Yep.
And we'll go ahead. So Tim, let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
The classic S meter, and if we should have set this up correctly, I could have switched to I can switch to a nothing antenna. So let's talk about the S meter. And we happen to, by the way, like my 40 meter noise floor in the middle of the day. We're recording this in mid-August. Look at that, minus 125 or so.
I'm incredibly jealous.
Yeah.
But then again, you are about 1,000 miles north in latitude than I am.
And I'm going to turn off all preamps, so we're going to come back to this. There.
Yeah, we'll get there eventually.
We'll get there. So there's my S meter.
Yep.
In the FT8 frequency. And just for fun, I am going to turn this to...
You can either turn it off or you can just tune out of the band. But either one works.
There's no antenna on RXB.
Absolutely. It's exactly what we would expect to see. So there's this...
Wait a minute. It's S4.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because I guess noise needs a Q report.
A Q report.
So this is a really good question, and this crops up a couple of times a year, and it's primarily with new users who are not familiar with the SDR technology. And so what happens here is that we're using the FLEX-6000 is a direct sampling software-defined radio. And in just a quick term, what that means is that we're taking a very wide bandwidth of RF energy from about 100 kilohertz, and depending on to the radio, up through about 50 megahertz. It's actually a little wider than that, but
it's 30 kilohertz to 54 megahertz.
For all practical purposes. But we're digitizing all of this RF information at one time. And so what you see in a slice receiver, and I'm going to have you zoom in a little bit because I want to see that little shaded area there. So when you zoom in on a slice receiver, one of the things that you see visually on the screen is the receive filter, the bandwidth or the pass band of the receiver for that slice receiver. And
lighter area right here.
Exactly. And so what ends up happening is that even though there's no signal here, and technically in this case there's no antenna connected, the ADC is so sensitive that it is still digitizing noise. Now, we hope that there's signal in this noise, but there's always noise. And the noise comes from lots of different places. There's thermal noise in the radio. There's electrical noise in the radio. There's cosmic noise, coming from space. There's man-made noise around you in your house. So there's all these different RF noise sources, and all of these, get kind of mushed together. And our ADC is sensitive enough to receive that. So, in this particular example, and I can't tell exactly what I think that's a 400
It's
hertz
400
filter.
hertz wide.
Okay, it's 400 hertz filter. So what the S meter is actually recording is the integrated noise power within the bandwidth constraint of the filter. So all of this noise that you see down here in the noise floor inside that filter, if you add up all of the noise power, it comes out to a value, and in this case, it looks like it's about
Just south of S3.
S3. So S3 noise. So one of the key points that I said was that we're integrating this noise power within the filter bandwidth. So now if we change this filter to a much smaller filter width, like 50 hertz, that'll give a good example. You'll notice that the S meter drops significantly. And the reason why this is happening is that it's the same amount of noise that was there. The only difference is that we're now integrating it over, or summing it over, a much narrower bandwidth. And since there's a smaller bandwidth, there's a lower value of noise power inside that filter. And so that's why you never see an S0. It
But
would
wait a minute, my FT101ZD, if I did that, the S meter would be 0.
Absolutely. And this is why we get a lot of questions about this. And that's because in traditional superhet type of radios, they don't have an analog to digital ADC converter that is converting this signal and measuring it directly at the antenna port like we are. What they normally did was that they derived they derived a voltage value of the radio from the RF preamp, I believe, and based on a voltage value, they would show you a S meter. So what they're basically doing, they needed some way of showing signal strength. That was an easy way in those radios to show signal strength. The only thing about it is that it wasn't an accurate measurement of signal strength. The key takeaway here is that this is an actual real measurement of signal strength. We're measuring signal strength in the exact same way that spectrum analyzers do it, and so it's a very accurate value that you're seeing there.
In the Superhet radio world, if you were a technician and you've ever aligned a radio and it came to the S meter alignment, you essentially shorted the antenna or dummy loaded the receive antenna. You adjusted the S meter to 0, right?
Yep.
And then the next thing you do is you would do 50 microvolts.
I think something like that.
Like that. And I pause, and we'll get corrected on that. Dial the next knob to S9.
Yeah.
And then you would hope the scale was correct everywhere else in between.
Yeah.
And that's why you've often heard people go, oh, my TS850, the meter in this is really stingy.
Yeah.
And because they did, their sampling was just a little different.
Or when they changed the RF gain, the S meter changed.
Yep.
And so
it's also why, though, it's also why when you turned your RF gain up,
yes,
why the S meter
also went up. Yes.
Yep.
So
and that's also why, we'll talk about this in a minute, why in digital modes you killed the automatic gain control. We'll get back to that one. They're all related.
Yes, they are all related. Just before we move on from this one, I have had some people try to argue that this is wrong, and I will tell you that we are a company of electrical engineers. Some of them are incredibly bright, and it doesn't matter how long you want to argue the point. S0 has a certain noise power value that is a defined value, and we adhere to that strictly. I've had some people say, well, what will it take to make my radio show S0? And I said, well, putting it in a Faraday cage and cooling it down with liquid nitrogen might get you to that point.
Okay. So am I not? So wait a minute. You're telling it's S4. I'm not going to hear the guy that's S1. And of course, that's not true, right?
That's not true. That's
Because he's
true.
not really S1, right?
He's not really S1. That's exactly right.
So
Because
what you're telling me?
he's
Oh,
just
go
a
ahead.
little bit of signal and a lot of signal and noise, and that's a great segue into our next area of conversation.
Before we
Which,
get there, though, so
yep,
if I really want to know what my noise floor is, if I turn this back on, if I leave this in CW at 50 hertz is a reasonably good reference to pitch.
the reference numbers that are normally done is with a 500 hertz filter.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to turn antenna 1 back on,
Yep, go to 500 hertz filter.
and we're going to go to 500 hertz.
Doink. Yep, and your noise floor is about an S3, little over.
A little over S3.
Yeah, I
Not bad
prefer reading it in dBm because, that's
right here.
a, a a real number that I can
And
subtract things from. I can't subtract S1 from S3 and get a value.
you know, we really need to do a whole talk on decibels for people that weren't educated in decibels, and that's okay if you don't know it. But
Yeah.
we could spend a half an hour and teach you 2 numbers, and those will be the only 2 numbers you need to know:
Yes.
3 and 10.
Yes.
And if you can add and subtract, you understand decibels. That's the way I was taught it. You'll notice, by the way, if I click here, and by the way, I've got it on a monitor up here, you'll see that I can switch between S and dBm. And if you run tools like FR Stack and whatever, it actually gives it to you as well. Or Node Red, all this data is available sort of, as we say, off the back of the radio, which is on the Ethernet port.
Okay, so going on to our next part, we're going to talk about optimizing signal reception. And our first subject of conversation is going to be the preamp, because we're going to talk about how the signal gets into the radio. And it gets captured by the antenna, goes down the coax. First place that it shows up in the radio is the RF preamp. So we'll talk about that first. Before I segue into that, I do want to talk about a couple of terms that I will use a lot in the rest of the conversation. And we're going to talk about signal, noise, and the signal to noise ratio, because optimal reception is all about optimizing the signal to noise ratio. You want to have more signal than you have noise, and that is, I mean, it sounds kind of straightforward, but that's exactly what you want to have, so that when you're receiving signal and you're not receiving noise. For those who are kind of unfamiliar with the signal noise concept, because I've had to explain this a couple of times too, think about it as a room full of people and everybody's talking at one time. And there's 25 people in the room, and there's one person that you want to listen to, but he's on the other side of the room. So he's the 26th person talking in the room. Those other 25 people are contributing to noise, which is masking the signal of the 26th guy on the other side of the room that is talking. So the ideal thing is you want those other 25 people to shut up so that you can hear the 26th guy talk. And essentially, that's what we're going to try to do here. We're going to try to reduce noise, or get those 25 people to, if not necessarily stop talking, but talk a lot quieter. So that's how we're going to go in that point. So all the FLEX-6000s have an RF preamp, and it is before the analog to digital converter. And the RF preamp does is that it will either add gain or reduce gain from the signal coming in from the antenna. We call this at the antenna port, but it'll either increase or reduce the gain at the antenna port. The RF preamp is an equal opportunity device, which means that it's going to boost gain and it's going to boost noise at the same time. What you want to do is you want to be in a certain situation where you're boosting more signal, or you're boosting more signal than you are boosting noise, and that will give you a better signal to noise ratio. So the key term in setting up a preamp is what we call a noise limited antenna. So if your antenna, and this is band specific, time of day specific, and to a certain degree, sometimes your antenna can be contributing this. Um, uh, at certain frequencies, you'll be receiving both noise and signal. And if you're receiving more noise than you're receiving signal, then when you turn an RF preamp on, all you're going to be doing is boosting the noise, because the signal will be hidden in it. Now, we call that a noise limited antenna. If the antenna is not noise limited, which means that noise isn't the predominant factor in what's being received, then when we increase the noise and we increase the preamp, we're increasing the noise level by just a little bit, but we're increasing the signal value more. And so now's the part of the presentation where we're going to go back to Smart SDR and kind of show a little bit of value of this.
And that's why preamps have calculated with a noise figure. Anybody can make an amplifier.
Yes.
But to make it without amplifying the noise
Yes.
is an art form.
Yes. Well, without amplifying external noise.
External noise.
Right. So there's kind of a rule of thumb with setting this up, and this is the first thing you want to do when you're optimizing signal for a particular band, is that you want to make sure the preamp is set to the right value. And so to do this, Mike's already changed the S meter up there to show dBms, which is good because what we're going to be looking for is about an 8 dB change in dBm from one state to the other. And currently right now we're on 40 meters, and we've got an antenna connected. It looks like what are we seeing there? It's a small screen on my end, and I have
minus
bad eyes.
100 on the meter and minus
Yep.
122 on the.
So what we're going to do here is we want to see what the S meter value is on a clear part of the band where there's no signal, because we're just looking for the noise part here, and we're looking at the difference between what the signal levels are with and without an antenna connected. So right now we've got the antenna connected. There's no signal in the pass band. Looks like it's about 100 dBm when it peaks out there.
Yeah.
This is going to be kind of fun because we're seeing some lightning crashes here.
Those are the horizontal parts here.
Yeah, well, I'm watching the noise floor jumping around too. And so what we'll end up doing is Mike's going to then take the antenna and just switch it to one of the RXA ports, something you don't have anything connected to. All right. So this is the noise floor. It's at about 100 and what is that? 104.
104, and we went to RXB, and I don't have anything connected to it.
Good. Okay, so let's go back to let's switch back to the antenna.
So in case you didn't know, the blue ones are the antenna, and the red ones are the transmit antenna.
Yeah. And so now we're up to, what is that, 100 and...
About 100.
About 100. Okay, so we've got about a 4 dB difference between turning the antenna on and turning the antenna off. That basically indicates that on 40 meters, right, we're here on this, is that we are actually noise limited, because the difference in dB gain between the two setting on and off is not greater than 8. So at this point, with this radio, for this band, we don't need any RF preamp, and that's kind of what I expected, because as a rule of thumb, you really don't need to use the RF preamp with positive gain values less than on bands less than 20 meters or lower in frequency than 20 meters. There is a possibility that you might need to use the attenuator. And on this radio, we actually don't have an attenuator.
Hold that thought for a minute.
Okay.
Okay. I think I'm smarter than you. I want to be able to hear anybody. So let's show us what bad numbers are.
Okay.
So do you want me to start?
Oh,
I'm
just
going to
crank
add
it.
gain.
Yeah, just crank it. Yeah, add some preamp gain in there.
Okay, we'll add 16 dB, and we
Okay.
can see it up here.
Yep.
And we want to, yep. So if we go back to the RXB,
Yep.
we'll see we're down to minus 115, 116.
Yep.
And if we turn the antenna back on to antenna 1, our noise is about minus 103. So
Minus
that's
100. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
minus.
Yeah. So you've got a little bit of you're adding a little bit of you're seeing a little bit of enhancement here, but you also have to deal with what I call the first law of radio thermodynamics, which is you don't get something for nothing. And the one thing that happens when you start increasing the RF preamp gain is that you're actually decreasing the dynamic range of the radio by that value. So we have actually decreased the dynamic range of the radio by 16 dB. So if this is a 100 dB radio, now this is now the dynamic range of this radio is now 86, 84.
And if I was running FT8 where we have big signals 100 hertz away from weak signals, would that make a difference in decoding?
Well, it makes a difference because you want the thing that dynamic range gives you in the radio is the ability to handle large signals adjacent to weak
Right.
signals. So that's one of the other things you want to balance out is you want to balance out the fact that you're not destroying your dynamic range just so that you might be able to hear a little bit better on a medium gain signal. Now, this radio does actually have negative gain, which is an attenuator. And when Mike put the attenuator on, you'll notice that the noise floor went up in value. So the noise floor goes up. The thing about this is that, and this is kind of hard to see, but there's these signals that are popping up out of the noise here. And when you change that if you change the RF preamp, back to 0, you'll notice that the noise goes down, but the signal level is actually stays the same.
Like watch this guy right here.
Yeah,
Because he'll be there for a second. And no matter what I do, his
he's always
signal,
at the same value.
which is about minus 110.
Yeah. So what is happening is that as you add attenuation, the noise floor or the noise increases on this particular band, and as you add preamp gain, you decrease the noise floor, or you're decreasing the noise relative to the signal, and that's the key point here. So like I said, the first step you want to do is you want to set your RF preamp. There's a really good article in the help desk that has a step-by-step set of instructions that you can go through and use to set the preamp gain. Like I said, be careful. This is something that is done by band and depending on the band, time of day. For example, 40 meters during the day and 40 meters at night have different noise floor characteristics depending on the time of year, relative to higher frequencies like 6 meters or 10 meters. So you may have to, if you're operating primarily on 160, 80, 40 meters, this is something that you may have to do quite often. And once you get it down, it's pretty quick to do. I mean, you'll like I said, once you figured out, looking at the value differences, it literally takes just a second or two to set your preamp. But it's very important to set it first, because it's driving the other processes that are farther down the signal chain that we're getting ready to go talk about. And Mike will post a link to that help desk article at the end of this video that I referenced. Looky there. That's the article, and he'll put a link.
Let me zoom in on that a bit. And so, Tim, tell us about, well, I'm setting this up too. At helpdesk.flexradio.com, we have a great selection of articles.
We certainly do. So we the help desk has a knowledge center where we have written a lot of articles that explains how to do certain things with the radios. This is one of these things where, if somebody asks me, how do I do X more than about 6 times, then we'll go write an article about how to do that, because somebody else is going to ask me the same question. And rather than, reinvent the wheel, I'd rather just point you to the article. And these articles do get updated occasionally, as software changes, as hardware in the radios change, and everything with it will update this. But this is a great article that explains noise limited antennas and how to set the RF preamp. It looks really technical and everything, but it truly isn't. It's a really good article.
I've written a bunch of these too, and Tim has been kind enough to post them. But there's from grounding to using equalization, high DPCs. I guess I should do a video, or we should do an article on the one I just did about how WSJT slows down when your computer gets really busy. It was an eye opener to me, because I happen to have a pretty slow computer to play with, and I was able to replicate it. But I have a video about that. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there is, I don't know, a couple hundred here.
At least. I lost count.
Rules for EQ, voice, you get it. Just always look here, and we'll find, if we're helping you in the community or within Tim's group, the help desk, we're not going to reboil the ocean. We're just going to give you the ocean the first time it was written.
Yep.
Type of thing. So,
exactly.
Anyway, so that's that part. And I know Tim's got one more chat.
Yep.
We're going to go. We've done this before. We really think it's important to go over it.
We're going to talk about the automatic gain control and the automatic gain threshold. So we're running a little late, a little close on time. So I'm not going to go into my full AGC conversation that I've had before. But essentially, the most powerful control in the radio for optimizing signal to noise ratio is the automatic gain control and at setting the threshold. And so in a nutshell, what the automatic gain control does is that, based on certain factors with the signal, the AGCT will amplify the noise and the signal that you are receiving by a certain value or gain or volume. It will increase the volume by a certain value at a certain threshold. And so the key tenet that you want to take away here with the AGCT is that you want to set the AGC in such a manner that you're just starting to increase the volume of the noise, because what you're doing is you're increasing the volume of the noise floor. This is without a signal inside of it. And when you
with an antenna connected.
With an antenna connected, yes. And so then when a signal pops up inside of that passband, it's going to be a little bit higher value than the noise. And because the AGC is amplifying things above that noise value, it's going to amplify the volume of your signal. And that's what you want. You want to be able to hear that guy on the other side of the room talking. You want him to talk louder. And that's essentially what the AGC threshold control does. How you set this is pretty simple. You tune to a portion of the band where there is no signals, and you put your headphones on and you open up the AGC controls, and you start with the AGC threshold, which is what Mike's moving there, and you can do
By
this
the
one of
way,
two.
it's in two places, right? If you look over to the top right.
Yeah, it's in the slice, and then it's also in the controller on the right hand side.
Now, Tim, you want us to start with it at 0 or 100?
So you can start with it at any different point. You can start low and go high. You can start high and go low. My personal preference is I like to start low and go high, because for me, my ears, I hear a higher, a greater difference in volume easier than I hear lower volumes easier. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to show an example of how to set the AGC threshold. Like I said, I like to start where it's low, because I can hear increases in volume better than I can hear decreases in volume. The other reason why is that at the higher volume, the AGC action is actually working. It's actually increasing the volume. And as you decrease it, it takes a little bit of time for the AGC to react to the change. So I think it's easier for me to do it this way. But we started out with a 0 threshold, and Mike's going to start increasing it until we start hearing the noise, and I'll tell him when to stop. Okay, so let's kind of stop there. I can kind of sort of hear the noise. And everything. And so what you're going to listen for is, he's going to increase the AGC threshold to a higher value to the right, a little slowly, at like one notch at a time, until there's a perceived doubling of volume. And then when you hit that point, back it off just a little bit.
So let me back up just to make sure we were back
Yep.
about 22.
Yeah, you can't hear anything.
Just a little faint. I can.
Yeah.
23. 25. 26. 27. 28. 29. 30.
We're starting to get there.
32. Around here, right? But
Yep.
35.
Yep. I was going to say, usually for my station, and I'm fairly RF quiet. I am in an urban area. I'm fairly RF quiet. And for 20 meters, my values are usually somewhere around 30 to 35. So we're at, I don't even know what the value is, because it doesn't show it until you do a mouse over thing. But that sounds about where it is. And if you'll move
it's 35. You can't see it on the mouse over. So.
Yep, 35 cents about right. So what will end up happening is that if there's a small signal, I think if you tune up in frequency just a little bit, I saw something there in the pan adapter.
This guy here?
Yeah, no, up in frequency, not down. Yeah, up right about there.
Yep.
There's a weak signal right in there.
There was another guy further up. What did we ever do without pan adapters?
We sat there with our hands smashing our headphones into our ears for hours at a time and turning the VFO very slowly.
Let's find somebody. And
yeah.
Oh, he's on every day. Sugar 57 Delta X-ray.
See if we can hear somebody weak calling him. Yeah.
Now, we didn't do our antenna setup on 20, but we should have.
Yeah.
I definitely don't need that. You'll be able to hear after a while. Just quickly, you can set your AJCT in a hurry.
Yep.
And
this is really most noticeable when you're dealing with weak signals. You know, voice weak signals are a beast all into itself. But with CW, when you set this right, there can be a signal that actually doesn't even show up in the noise floor. It'll actually be buried in the noise. And if you have your AGC threshold set correctly, as soon as he starts sending, it'll pop volume wise.
I've had people tell me all the time, uh, I won't be able to hear the weak signals. It's too quiet. And that couldn't be further from the truth.
Yes.
Give your ears a break. You'll be able to hear the weak signals.
Yes. You don't have to fight with the noise anymore. These are advanced radios that have some really good capabilities for weak signal and low noise reception.
Okay. One more thing, because back to my FT101ZD, I grew up with turning the AGC off and just using the would be the RF gain. We'll just turn this on, but we can't. Well, we don't need to, but we still do. Some people still do that in digital modes because they get what they feel is the correct dynamic range.
Right.
Being able. So back when I had my 101ZD, that was the old school where I got rid of the RF gain. I turned. What we did, we would turn the AGC off, turn the audio gain all the way up, and use the RF gain for volume control. Right.
Right.
Do we need to do that today?
No. So when our AGC is set in off, it's actually what off does is it actually applies a fixed level of gain to the signal and the noise, regardless of the signal level. Our AGC is pretty smart when you're using slow, medium, or fast, where it's actually analyzing the signal and applying AGC or applying gain or volume to the signal based on signal strength and other characteristics. So there's a lot of older radios where setting the AGC off for digital modes gives those particular radios a better advantage in reception. And there's a lot of digital mode documentation that will basically say, hey, turn your AGC off, but they don't explain why or when. The deal here is that turning it off is not a blanket thing to do. For FT8, and I operate a lot of FT8 on 6 meters. I just, my AGC aggressiveness is set at medium, and I can't tell absolutely any difference between medium, fast, slow settings once I have the preamp set correctly and once I have the AGC threshold set so that I'm not amplifying noise. Now, I can tell a difference if I turn the AGC off. Then I have to ride the AGC gain down to make sure that I'm not amplifying, noise. The problem with that is that if I've got a really strong signal in my passband, the AGC is going to amplify that strong signal, as much as it's going to amplify the weak signal. And so your relative difference between the two is there is none. It's just
Right.
it's louder, at a certain point you can have so much signal going into the FT decoder that you're swamping the decoder. So I generally do not set it off.
So do your WSJT or JTTX decoder a favor, because it's harder. It's more data to produce. It will add to latency as well, right? It's busy.
Yeah.
And Tim nailed it. There's in the doc, and I've read the documentation we both have on WSJT, very well written, but it doesn't say. It's generally set up for, not generally, it's almost totally set up for software defined, Superhet radios, where you have different stages of gain and everything, and also why they want you to run fake it so that it keeps this is another whole long discussion, but your audio passband in the center of the mechanical filters. Once you're into a software world, those mechanical filter shapes don't exist. And so I can run non-fake it. And, work a guy at 100 hertz above carrier, or at 295 or 2,995 with my high cut or my low pass filter set to 3,000 with a high cut, and have no issue, still get full power out. If you ever want more explanation on that, feel free to reach out to us. So, Tim, that's awesome. So you can usually find Tim on 6 meter FT8 on his, you have a Moxon, I think, don't you? On
Yes.
6?
Yep. Just two puny little elements that have, in the last 3 years, got me 370 something grids. So not too bad.
Unbeknownst, working towards the Fred Fish Award, and you're from Aware Grid. Let him know in a support case he'll probably try to fix your problem and work you.
Yeah. So I'm in FMO5 in North Carolina, which makes it convenient when there's an opening to Europe. It makes it incredibly inconvenient when you're trying to work Oregon, Washington, and Alaska.
And anything about 4 grids out, because I have the same problem, right?
Yes.
So I
the
need
grid
meteor scatter for that.
The grid donut around you. Yes.
Yeah. Well, maybe
absolutely.
we're recording this in mid-August, so the Perseus is coming up. We can do some MSK 144. And
Absolutely.
if you're doing any of the digital modes like that, the techniques are pretty much the same.
Yes.
And we'll make contacts and we'll be successful. Tim, thank you. Thanks for all you do. And if anybody
you're quite
dealt
welcome.
with Tim professionally, you know how to get hold of him. I don't know if your personal email address is on QRZ, but if it is, you're welcome to talk ham radio. Don't talk work on our private email addresses. It actually makes us pretty grumpy. And or if you like to what can I talk about? If you like to play guitar, he's all about guitars.
I play a little bit. Yeah.
You play a little bass,
yeah,
right?
Just a little bit.
And well, thanks very much.
Thank you, Mike.
This is Mike, VA3MW. If you have any questions for us, info@flexradio.com anytime. And we're always here for you. 73. Take care.
All right.